The curse of the Egyptian mummies is a popular legend that suggests that anyone who disturbs the tombs of an ancient pharaoh or his nobles will suffer great affliction. This curse, which does not differentiate between thieves and archaeologists, is claimed to cause bad luck, illness, or even death. With one such inscription on a tomb reading, "As for all men who shall enter this my tomb, impure, there will be judgment. An end shall be made for him. I shall seize his neck like a bird. I shall cast the fear of myself into him." The idea of a curse associated with Egyptian mummies gained widespread popularity in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, particularly after the discovery of the tomb of King Tutankhamun by British archaeologist Howard Carter in 1922. This curse is believed to have caused a series of mysterious and tragic events that affected many people who were involved in the discovery of the tomb. Welcome to the Poison Culture Podcast, where people of interest start our news. I'm your host, Cody Gregory, and on this episode, I'm diving into the popular myth of Egyptian mummy curses. The supposed curse of the mummies was largely a product of media sensationalism, fueled by reports of unusual deaths and misfortunes that occurred among the people who were involved in the excavation of Egyptian tombs. Mere legends soon turned to coincidences that couldn't be overlooked. I have been fortunate enough to have spent some time in Egypt, getting to know the culture, the people, the history. I've grown up seeing Egypt in movies from the likes of Indiana Jones or the Mummy movies with Brendan Fraser. Growing up, I was always intrigued by the history of the archaeological findings in the desert, but nothing could have prepared me for the surreal moment of actually being there. For a culture with such a vast history, in some instances, it is just the exact same as what Howard Carter would have seen and experienced back in the 1920s. The rich architectural designs of temples, statues, and hieroglyphs preserved through time and history is something that I've been fortunate enough to see with my own eyes, as nothing on film or TV can even come close to doing justice. To go inside the pyramids of Giza, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, is something not everyone can say they've done. But it sure does leave you with some more questions than answers on the lives of the ancient Egyptians. Egypt is a treasure trove of archaeological sites and discoveries that have shed light on the ancient civilization that thrived along the Nile River for thousands of years. From the pyramids to the Sphinx, all the way to the Valley of the Kings. This royal burial site contains the tombs of pharaohs and powerful nobles from the 16th to the 11th century BC, including the tomb of Tutankhamun. When I was there, I could only imagine the labor of excavating treasures under the hot sun. Not an easy job with all the sandflies nipping at you on the surface, and the thick, stale air of the tombs underground. But what a joy it would have been not only to discover artifacts, but to find the mummified remains of a pharaoh. The ancient Egyptians believed in an afterlife, and believed that the preservation of a body was necessary for the soul to live on after death. They believed that the soul would return to the body after death, and the mummification process helped to ensure that the body was preserved for this purpose. The mummification process involved several stages and could take up to 70 days to complete, with some of these steps including washing the body with water from the Nile River to purify it. The internal organs such as the liver, lungs, stomach, intestines were removed and placed in canopic jars. The brains were also removed by inserting a hook through the nose and pulling it out. The body was then covered in salt, which helped to dry out the tissue and prevent decay. Once the body was dry, it was wrapped in linen bandages, with amulets and charms placed between the layers for protection. The wrapped body was then painted with resin and decorated with a mask of the person's face. The mummified body was placed into the coffin, which is often elaborately decorated with scenes from the person's life and hieroglyphic inscriptions. The mummification process was a complex and expensive procedure, and it was reserved for the elite members of society, such as pharaohs and nobles. The process evolved over time with some variations depending on the time period and the region of Egypt. So when ancient tombs of the pharaohs were discovered, it wasn't long for treasure hunters and grave robbers to pillage the resting chambers of its contents, including the human remains. But for reasons unknown, the psychological effects of mummified remains took a toll on its new handlers. In 1699, Louis Penicher wrote an account in which he recorded how a Polish traveler bought 2 mummies in Alexandria and embarked on a sea journey with the mummies in the cargo hold. The traveler was alarmed by recurring visions of 2 specters, and the stormy seas did not calm until the mummies were thrown overboard. There is one account where a young archaeologist had to transport several artifacts from a site. His cousin died on that day. His uncle died on the 1st anniversary, and on the 3rd anniversary, his aunt died. But one of the most infamous recounts of cursed tombs is that of King Tut. Howard Carter's discovery of King Tut's tomb is one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. The tomb was discovered in the Valley of the Kings in Luxor, Egypt, on November 4th, 1922. The discovery was made after years of searching by Carter and his team. Carter had been working in the Valley of the Kings since 1907 and had been searching specifically for King Tut's tomb since 1914. To everyone's surprise, the tomb was almost completely intact and contained a vast collection of treasures including jewelry, furniture, pottery, art, and artifacts. The discovery of the tomb was a sensation, and it made international headlines. The excavation of the tomb took many years, and the treasures were carefully studied and preserved by Carter and his team. The artifacts from the tomb are now housed in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, as well as in museums around the world. The treasure helped to spark a renewed interest in ancient Egypt history and culture. The discovery also sparked controversy and intrigue, as many people believed that the curse had been placed on the tomb, and that those who had been involved in the discovery would suffer terrible consequences. The famous Egyptologist James Henry Breasted worked with Carter soon after the first opening of the tomb. He reported how Carter sent a messenger on an errand to his house. On approaching his home, the messenger thought he heard a faint, almost human cry. Upon reaching the entrance, he saw a birdcage occupied by a cobra, the symbol of the Egyptian monarchy. Carter's canary had died in the cobra's mouth as it ate it, and thus fueled the rumors of a curse approaching from beyond the grave. By 1929, 11 people associated with the discovery of the tomb had died of early and of unnatural causes. The media labeled this turn of events as the mummy's curse. The first of the deaths was that of Lord Carnarvon, who financed the excavation. He had been bitten by a mosquito and later slashed the bite accidentally while shaving. It became infected, and that resulted in blood poisoning. George J. Gould, a visitor of the tomb, died in the French Riviera on 16th of May, 1923, after he developed a fever following his visit. Sir Archibald Douglas Reed perished soon after X-raying the mummy in London. In 1925, the anthropologist Henry Field visited the tomb and recalled how a paperweight given to Carter's friend, Sir Bruce Ingram, was composed of a mummified hand, with its wrist adorned with a scarab bracelet marked with the words, "Cursed be who moves my body. To him shall come fire, water, and pestilence." Soon after receiving the gift, Ingram's house burned down, followed by a flood when it was rebuilt. A strange coincidence, or something more sinister? British archaeologist Hugh Evelyn White, who worked at the dig at Luxor, died by suicide in 1924. He reportedly left a note in which he wrote, "I have succumbed to the curse." Carter's personal secretary, Richard Bethel, the first person to enter the tomb behind his employer, was found smothered to death at his London men's club in 1929. Howard Carter himself was entirely skeptical of such curses, dismissing them as Tommy rot, and commenting that the sentiment of the Egyptologist is not one of fear, but of respect and awe, entirely opposed to foolish superstitions. In May of 1926, he reported in his diary a sighting of a jackal, of the same type as Anubis, the guardian of the dead, for the first time in his over 35 years of working in the desert, although he did not attribute this to supernatural causes. Skeptics have pointed out that many others who visited the tomb or helped to discover it lived long and healthy lives. A study showed that of the 58 people who were present when the tomb and sarcophagus was opened, only 8 died within a dozen years. All of the others were still alive, including Howard Carter. who died of lymphoma in 1939 at the age of 64. Overall, while the idea of a curse associated with opening a mummy's tomb in Egypt is intriguing, when approaching the subject with a critical eye, the evidence suggests that any misfortune or tragedy associated with these tombs is likely due to natural causes rather than the supernatural. For some, the injuries or accidents are related to the physical demands of archaeological work. Both thieves and archaeologists have developed respiratory illnesses or infections after exposure to dust and bacteria inside the tombs. One theory suggests that over time, the food offerings left in the sealed tombs of the pharaohs began to rot and mold, and in this environment creating dormant spores inhaled once the tombs were opened. Potentially harmful fungi survive for extreme lengths of time in tombs, and results of research indicate that such prolonged phases of dormancy can result in increased virulence. Spores of mold and fungus grow especially well on grain, the supply of which was abundant in King Tut's tomb, with offerings of bread and raw grains stored in numerous baskets. In 1999, Gotthard Kramer, a German microbiologist, took samples of 40 mummies and identified several species of potentially dangerous mold spores. Furthermore, an Italian physician identified Aspergillus ocratius at an Egyptian archaeological site, which has been shown to produce deadly mycotoxins. This scenario was also thought for the tomb of King Casimir IV of Poland in 1973. Of the 12 research scientists who entered the tomb, 4 died within a few days, and 6 more died months later. One of the survivors conducted microbiological examinations on the tomb and found 3 species of fungus. He speculated that the deaths might have been resulted from the exposure of toxins caused by the fungus. However, this explains the illness associated with opening a tomb. As for the coincidental events and deaths, they are often cited as evidence for the existence of a mummy's curse. But some say there is no credible scientific or historical evidence to support the idea that supernatural curses were responsible for the misfortunes experienced by some individuals associated with the discovery of ancient Egyptian tombs. Additionally to these findings, the idea of curses was consistent to the popular Western perception of Egypt as a land of mystery and magic, with ancient knowledge and secrets that modern people were not meant to know. The idea of a curse associated with Egyptian mummies and the tombs played into this perception, fueling the imagination of the public and providing a sense of danger and excitement associated with the discovery of ancient artifacts. There is mention of quote-unquote dark magic in almost every culture around the globe. Some call it voodoo, witchcraft, occultism. The ancient Egypts were no different with the Book of the Dead. It is a collection of ancient funeral texts and spells that were believed to help guide and protect the soul of the deceased in the afterlife. The texts date back to the New Kingdom period of ancient Egypt history, between the 16th and 11th centuries BCE. But some of those spells may be even older. The book contains a variety of spells, prayers, and instructions that were written on papyrus and placed in tombs alongside the deceased. The Book of the Dead was not a single book, but rather a collection of spells and texts that were varied depending on the time period and the individual's status and position in society. The texts were believed to help the soul navigate the dangers of the underworld and reach the afterlife successfully. Some of the spells in the book involved reciting prayers to various gods and goddesses, while others involved rituals to protect the body and soul. Many of the spells focused on helping the soul avoid various dangers, such as demons and other malevolent spirits. Overall, the Egyptian Book of the Dead provides a fascinating insight into the beliefs and rituals of ancient Egyptian society and their ideas about the afterlife. In fact, many ancient Egyptians believed in the importance of preserving the bodies of the dead through mummification, and to some it is believed that they would likely have been pleased that their tombs and their mortal remains were being carefully studied and preserved by modern scholars. I know after my time in Egypt, it is hard not to rule out that maybe somehow the ancient civilization who built the Great Pyramids and vast temples adorned with hieroglyphs may have possibly tapped into something supernatural beyond our understanding. Whether you believe in ancient spell work or not, the mystifying lore of Egyptian mummies is fascinating. You can classify a curse as an extraordinary event or phenomenon that is believed to be caused by a supernatural or divine intervention, and it is not explicable by nature, scientific laws, or rational means. But you can also verbatim classify a miracle the same way. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Poison Culture Podcast, and maybe piqued your curiosity into the strange events of mummy curses. Follow us on Instagram at Poison Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Cody Gregory, and as always, until next time, stay spooky.